Hi everybody, it's Stephen here for the Idiot Quilter, and today I'm creating a video showing you how I'm going to quilt this quilt using my embroidery machine. Now I have done a video about that before, and I have refined my technique since then. So I thought it might be of interest to show you step by step my process for actually doing a quilt on my embroidery machine, quilting it. So you see here a quilt that I just finished. This is a large throw. It originally started out as a bed runner, and I'm making it for a lady that shares a room with my mother in the nursing home. Very nice lady. I noticed one day when I was over there visiting my mother that she had a picture of a cat. And I asked her about it, and it was her cat, and that cat is still alive and being looked after by relatives since she could not have it in the nursing home. And I know that she misses her cat. So I thought what might be nice is to make her a quilt that has a cat pattern to it. And I found this fabric of these really wildly colored cats in blues and purples and pinks, and I kind of like that color combination. And I thought this might be something that'll bring some cheer to her and some comfort as well. Now, as I said, it started out as a bed runner, but I got a little carried away, and it's now a very large throw. And since she's in a wheelchair, I think that will be nice for her to have as well. So she can use it on her bed, and she can use it when she's in her chair. So that's what I'm going to do. So I've got some quilting patterns that I want to choose one for this. And oh yes, the back of this looks like this. That's basically what the cat fabric looked like in its whole cloth method. I just fussy cut it down for these squares in here. And so I have to pick my pattern, I have to pick my thread. And what I usually do first, once I have the pattern and the thread picked, is I do a little sample piece. Just take a piece of white fabric with some stabilizer behind it, hoop it, and have it sew it out. And then I mark my grid, which I'll show you in a few minutes, in order to do the proper placement on the quilt to make it look like basically continuous edge-to-edge quilting. So I'll show you that in just a few moments. Okay, so what I've done is I've set up my test sheet. So what I have is a piece of just white muslin and or white cotton, I guess it is. And I've got a piece of tearaway stabilizer underneath it, and I've got it anchored into the actual hoop that I will be using for the quilt. And I have picked my color. I'm using a very light blue color, and I've already wound 10 bobbins with this thread. And the thread that I'm using is, I can't show you the actual color, but I'll show you this one. And this comes from Monfil, and I did a review about Monfil. They're located in Quebec, and they have really great sewing products, and I love their thread. This is their sewing thread that I'm using for this, not an embroidery thread. This is it, my top, and the same color. This isn't exactly the color. I have a lighter blue, but this is going to go in my bobbin as well, and that's what I'm going to quilt with. Now, I have changed my needle. Originally I started with an embroidery needle, but what I've put now into my machine is a top stitch needle because the thread would not go through, although they're the same size, would not go through my embroidery needle for some reason, and at least through the automatic threader. And I didn't want to force it because that's when you start shredding thread. So I'm trying a top stitch needle, which should be good for quilting. At least I'm hoping so. So what I'm doing right now is my test. So I've set everything up. I've taken my pattern. I have it loaded into the machine. I did do some alteration with the pattern. I made it 4 actually to fill the hoop. And I played around with the editing program a little bit to get everything positioned where I want it. And I'm looking at this right now and I'm thinking, I need to make one more adjustment. So I'm going to do that and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've made my adjustment to my pattern and now I'm ready to sew it out. And I'm just going to grab my thread here because I've got my machine set up to do a 1-stitch stop, which means I can pull up my bobbin thread. And there it is. And I just take my trusty tweezers, rented lips. And there it is. And I'll pull that up, and once it gets going, I'll cut off the tail. And I'm just going to cut off the tail. And there we go. Now I'll position the camera a little closer so you can see what's happening. I hope that's a little better for you. So essentially I picked a pattern that is circles because I have a lot of straight lines and angles in the quilt. I thought this would be a nice complementary pattern for this quilt. And I'm doing it in a very light blue, which will show up, but I hope not take away from the rest of the design of the quilt. I did think of doing it in purple or magenta, but I thought that might be a little too shocking. I think this is a little bit more subtle, but at the same time, it will be seen. Now, according to my machine, this overall pattern is going to take about 17 minutes to sew. And that's how long it would take for each hooping in the quilt. And right now, I'm guesstimating that I'm going to have to do quite a few hoopings. So you can see this is not a fast process. This is going to take me probably a couple of days to do. But the one advantage of doing this over doing it on a long arm machine is, one, I don't own a long arm machine, so I don't have to book time on a long arm, and I don't have to pay. It's about $30 an hour to book a long arm in my area to do this. So that's one of the main reasons, not so much the cost, but one of the main reasons why I choose this method, because I can do it in my own time. I don't have to schedule time and then rush to make sure I get it all done and get out of the long arm shop in a timely fashion. So I may be giving up a little bit of speed for this. And actually, I can speed this up. I'm running right now at I'm running at 1,000 stitches per minute, which is the fastest my machine will go. So that's pretty good. But also, I'm going to get something that's a little bit more accurate than if I was to do it myself on a long arm. Yes, I know some people might think this is cheating. But then doing it on a long arm, is that not cheating too? Anytime we use a machine on a quilt, is that not cheating? No, it's not cheating. It's the modern way to do quilts. It's as simple as that. If we have the technology, let's use it. So I'm going to let this carry on and do the full design, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do with it next. So I've got just under a minute left for finishing this sample. And I did some mathematical calculations and figured out that I'll probably have to do about 56 hoopings. Yes, 56 hoopings. And at 17 minutes per hooping plus a little time for setup on each one, it's going to take about 16 hours to quilt this quilt. Now, if I did it on a long arm, it would be a lot less time. But again, I've already stated my reasons why I'm not doing it on a long arm. So yeah, this is not a quick process. And I did pick a fairly complicated pattern, as you can see. It's fairly detailed. So I'm going to remove this from the machine, and I'm going to set it up so I have my markings as to how to position it on my quilt, and I'll show you how I do that. So I've taken the hoop out of the machine, but I have left the sample all in the hoop as it is yet. I'm not taking that out yet because I'm going to grab my grid. This is the grid that came with my quilting hoop. And what you do is you place this into your hoop, just like that. And it shows me my middle spot right here and my parameters. And what I'm going to do now is, this is pretty close to almost being all the way to the edge. So I'm going to take some of this very neon-y marking tape, and if I can find the end of it, yeah, These tapes are always so great to find an end. There it is. And I'm going to put a strip of this tape along the edges, right where the pattern comes to, so I know where to line this up when I move it over on the quilt. It's just a little easier than counting over. And I need some scissors. Okay, so that's my right edge. My left edge, even though it's pretty much right up against that outside line, I'm still going to mark it because I want to get my patterns as close to each other as I can without overlapping, because I want to make this pattern look like it's a continuous pattern. And I need some tape on the top. And on the bottom. So this is how I'm going to know where to position my quilt each time. Okay, so I've got this marked, so now I can remove this from the hoop, and you see it has these magnetic clamps, so you're not having to press it between two hoops, which, because it's so thick, would make it very difficult. So there we go. Remove that, and now I'm going to put the quilt in it. Now what I'm going to do, and I just dropped stuff on the floor, excuse me for a second. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to get another table out here so I can lay the quilt out, and I'm going to line it up. Now, a lot of people say that you should start the quilting from the center of your quilt because it pulls your fabric in and all that kind of stuff. I find using this method, it doesn't really matter. In fact, it's easier if I start in the middle of the quilt, but at the top, and then work my way across one side, turn the whole quilt around, and work from the center over to the other side. That way I don't have a lot of the quilt necessarily underneath my throat, and so it's picking up the bulk. And I'm also going to hook up my bungee cords, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute, which actually is my way of keeping the weight of the quilt up off of the table of the sewing machine. So I'm going to get these things set up here, and I'll come right back. Okay, so I've grabbed a table and put it out here, and I've figured out approximately where the center of my quilt is. I'm not that worried about being that accurate because this is a continuous design and it will be going right off the edges of the quilt, so it'll be close enough. So here is the tricky part. What we have to do is get the hoop, and I drop things again. This is when I wish I had a really large sewing room, but I don't, so we work with what we've got. So this approximately is the center. I'm kind of lining it up here with this piece of sashing, just roughly. I'm going to stick my hoop underneath, and I want my pattern to go off the edge of the quilt here. This is the extra fabric I was talking about before. So now the tricky part is getting it straight. So I'm grabbing my template that I've already marked. I'm just setting it in the hoop, and I'm kind of looking at where my design will end up here. So I'm going to bring the fabric down just a little bit more. I want a little to hang on to here. So, okay, that's not where I want to go. This first hooping is always the most difficult because you want to take your time and get it accurate. And I'm just trying to straighten it up here. And I'm just going to pull this up a little bit more. And I'm just tugging on the quilt to get it in line with this pink line here that I put on the top. And yeah, that leaves me a little bit that I can clamp. And then I'm trying to keep it straight. So I'm using some of my sashing, and anything that's on the quilt that's in a straight line in the patchwork, I'm using to line things up. I'm going to pull this over a little bit, just so this line is lined up with this piece of sashing, which I know is difficult for you to see, but trust me, that's what I'm doing. And that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to clamp it. Now, I don't have much up here to clamp, but I'm not worried about that because there's clamps going all the way around this. Now, when you clamp it, it does pull the fabric. So you have to do a little bit of adjusting as you go along. Now, that's not so bad on the first hooping, but the first hooping is going to be the one that we're going to use to line up all future hoopings. And that's when this fabric is being pulled that you want to be a little bit more careful so that things don't overlap, but at the same time come very close to each other so it looks like a continuous design. So I have my grid in place and my hoop. So the next thing I need to do is I'm going to hang up my bungee cords, show you what that looks like, and then show you how I make sure I have my needle in the right position. So I'll come back and show you that in just a moment. Okay, so I'm going to show you my bungee cords, which I hang from my rafters to take the weight of the quilt up off the table. And this is important because if the quilt is being pulled while even though it's clamped, it can make things go crooked or cause, to have some thread breakages or things like that. So what I've done is I've created the system. I'm just going to tilt it up here. And you can see I have just a cup hook in my rafters. I'm lucky this part of the basement is not finished. And I've got a bungee cord with a clamp on the end. Now I've got two more of these over this way, as you can see. And you can see I've got the far edge of my quilt clamped into those. And that's lifting up this part here. So there's actually no weight on my machine. Just tilt down here and show you a little bit more. Now I've got my quilt rolled up over here. And I've got some clips on it just to keep it that way. Once I've done the first row and go across, I will probably be able to use this other bungee cord to hold up the quilt from that end. So I just adjust the bungee cords as I need them. And that seems to work. Now I have seen systems you can buy on Amazon or on the internet that are designed as freestanding, but essentially they're the same idea with the bungee cords. In fact, that's where I got the idea from. And so if you don't have open rafters to be able to do this, just do a search for, I think they're called quilt supports or quilt frame. No, not quilt frames. That's a different thing. Quilt supports or something like that. And you can find them. And they're a little pricey, but not that bad. Or you could probably rig up, if you're handy with woodworking, you could probably rig up your own system of this. But I find that this actually does work. So I'm just going to get in here a little closer. So there you see that I've got my quilt already mounted onto the plate. And I'm just going to go over to this side of the machine. And now I want to make sure that my needle is in the center. And right now, it is not. So all I'm going to do is just adjust it so that it is in the center mark. Yes, it's in the center mark now. So now I can take this hoop out, lift my needle up a little further. There we go. Oops, knocked off a clip or two here. That happens, not a problem. put this clip back on, and this clip was holding this. So must have come off this end. Okay, now I'm making sure none of this quilt, I have it sitting on my lap to lift up the weight again, and it looks like I've come unthread it, and I have. So I need to thread my machine again. It takes only a second. I love the automatic threader. It's just a godsend. Okay, just double checking to make sure everything's a go. So I am ready to quilt. So let's drop the needle and start. And I've got the one-stop stitch on so I can pull up my threads. There they are, and away we go. And I'm just stopping it for a second so I can get the tails out of the way and clip them. And carry on. I'll move the camera in a little closer. That's as close as I can get because I have a bar that hangs out, which this hoop is attached to, and I don't want it to, hit it, basically. But you get the idea. I'll just let this run for a few more seconds so you can see what it's doing. And I had coffee. Where did I put it? Now you'll notice that my stitching is running off the edge of my quilt. That's okay because that's the part that the binding will go over, and it'll look like it's just a continuous pattern unless the binding is on it. And as I said, my guesstimate is that I'll need about 56 hoopings, and at 17 minutes a piece at the highest speed, this is going to take more than a day. It's going to take me several days because I probably won't work on it continuously, but that's okay because using the system, if I need this sewing machine to do something else, then I can just take the quilt off and I know where I've left off, especially once I get a couple more hoopings on this, and so it's not difficult to get it all lined up and to carry on with it. And that's what I like about doing this method. I am at the whim of my own schedule. I am not at the whim of a schedule of booking times at a long armor. So what I give up in speed, I gain in convenience. Yes, I think this pattern is going to look very nice on this quilt. Now, I can move away from this machine. I don't have to sit here all the time watching this because one advantage of the Janome 15,000 Horizon machine is it has a Wi-Fi system built into it, and there's an app for your phone. And you can actually watch the progress of what your quilt is doing from other locations in your house. And I'll just show you what that looks like on here. Here's what it looks like on my phone. You can see that. And it's following it. It's telling me how many minutes are left and what its progress is. If I go away from the machine and I have a thread break, this will warn me there's been a thread break. The uncanny thing about the technology is as soon as I move away from this machine, there'll be a thread break. Maybe. But I've had a lot of luck, knock wood, with this thread that I'm buying from monfil.ca called Super V or Superb thread. Never sure which way to say it. And it doesn't seem, another shot, it doesn't seem to break very often. Knock wood about that. I'm loving their product. Okay, so you get the idea here. So I'm going to leave it and I'll come back when I've got the first hooping done and show you how I line up the second hooping. Okay, so I finished the first hooping, as you can see. Now it's time to move it over. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we're going to do is put our grid back in right here and just slide it underneath. And this grid is marked with the top and a bottom, so you know which way to put it in. And then we're going to take off our clamps. Now I'm not going to take the hoop off the machine. I'm going to just move the quilt. So put my clips over here, put them up here out of the way, and I'm just going to, actually I'm going to move my hoop away a little bit, or my grid away a little bit, slide it over, and I'm going to use my taped lines to adjust everything. Now this time, the way I'm lining it up under here is I'm going to match up the lines with the edge of the first pattern. This is a little tricky at first. First couple of hoopings are always the hardest because you got to get things lined up. And as I said, there's a little bit of pull and stretch on this. So keeping it square is as best you can. Now I'm using some of the lines on my quilt, on the blocks. There's a line in here that I'm just kind of pulling my quilt towards because that'll mark it straight. Now I'm too far over this way. So there's a little bit of fiddling where you don't have to do this once your quilt is lined up on a long arm, but this is not a long arm. So let's just see here. Now I want it to look as continuous as possible, and that means not having too much of a gap between the designs on the hoop. Now it looks pretty good on that side. How do we look at the top? Not bad. And I'm just tugging here and there just to straighten things out a little bit more. Okay, now comes the part where I clamp it again. Now this is where you've got to watch it because your clamps will pull your fabric a little bit. So far, so good. Just checking my top again. Now again, I don't have a lot of material to clamp at the top, but it's enough. If I had been smarter, and I forgot to do this, that's why I'm an idiot, I would have left a good 8 inches all the way around, but I didn't. But it's still workable. But ideally, you want to make sure you have lots of fabric so you have something to clamp to. Now I'm just checking the positioning of everything, and I'm just, giving it a little tug. Okay, that's looking pretty good. All right, now I'm going to check the placement of my needle to make sure it's in the center. And it is. That's good. If it hadn't been, I would have just adjusted it with my controls. And so I'm just going to pull my grid back out. And I'm ready to go with round 2. So let's start this. I may want to adjust my clamps a little bit to keep the weight up off the hoop. Okay, think that's good. Make sure these are secure. I have had them pop out, and usually only one pops and it doesn't cause you any problem, but sometimes it happens, so you just want to double check, make sure the weight is distributed on the quilt, and away we go. Pull up my thread. There it is. Cut my tails. And this is our second hooping. Now, I do keep a record of how many hoopings I get from a bobbin. My machine does have a low bobbin warning that will come up. But if you can avoid the bobbin from running out halfway through a design, it makes life a little easier. But if it does, again, I will just leave the quilt in the hoop, move it on over to the side, pull out my old bobbin, put in the new bobbin, and restart. So it's not really a problem. Yes, the placement there is looking very good. Now sometimes you want to watch up here. I have based, one reason I base these down is also to keep it from getting caught underneath the foot. But when it comes close to there, you want to look, watch it very carefully. If it looks like it's catching under the fabric, stop your machine and just adjust it. This is looking good. Everything's cooperating very nicely. Knock wood, don't say too much, don't want to jinx it. Okay, so I'll come back when I have the second hooping done and show you what it looks like at that point. Okay, so my bobbin is now empty. It came up on my machine, it warned me it was empty. Actually, I was able to get a few more rounds out of the bobbin before it was completely empty, and now I need to change it. And here's the problem. I'm in the middle of the design. I still have this one little quadrant down here to finish up this design. So what do I do to change the bobbin? Not a big problem. All we have to do is move the hoop over this way so we can get at the bobbin case. So to do that, I just go in to my editing program. I'm just switching over here. And I'm going to tell it to move my hoop over that way. Oops, sorry, I went the wrong way. Try this again. So I'm just going to go up, and I'm just going to leave it there for now. And I'm going to take my hoop out. I'm not going to take my quilt out of the hoop. So I'm being very careful as I move it here so it doesn't pop out of the hoop. And it shouldn't. It's fairly snug. Take out my bobbin. And I have another pre-wound bobbin. That's why I pre-wound about 10 of these. Just drop it in my bobbin case and thread it. Put the cover back on. Flip this back under here and reattach the hoop. Again, being very careful not to pop the quilt out of the hoop. Because if you pop it out of the hoop, you can line it up, but it may not be all that easy. Okay, so then we're going to go down. Now, it's taken my needle and put it right at the starting position, but I want it over here, but I can see it on my screen. So all I have to do is very quickly go through my stitches. And on my machine, it starts at single, then 10, then 100 increments. And I can watch it on the screen and see exactly where it's going. Now, what I might do is write down the number of the stitch that it should be at if this is where my bobbin runs out the next time. Just be faster because I can plug that number in. Not quite there yet. Okay, I may have overshot. I'm watching this on my screen. I know you can't see it, but I can see where the needle's positioned because there's a little crosshairs right here. So there we go. So I'm going to make a note of this for next time. 93.43 is where I left off in the bottom quadrant. Just in case I run out again in that spot, then I can get there much quicker than I did now. So now all I have to do is press start and carry on. And away we go. So it isn't difficult if you run out of bobbin thread, but it's really a good idea to have a lot of bobbins already pre-wound, ready to go. That'll just save you some time in the long run. So we'll let this finish up, and in the next little spot, I'm going to show you what happens when you get to the edge of your quilt. Okay, so now we've come to the part where I'm going to move the hoop again, but this time I'm probably going to go off or very close to the edge, so we'll have to see what will happen here. So we're just going to move the hoop up, drop in our grid, just like we did the last time. Get that settled in there. And now take off our clamps. And move our quilt over. Now we'll see where this ends up. Okay, now we have a decision to make. We've got about 2 inches that aren't going to be covered by this design from this. So we can do one of two things here. We could move this over, but that's going to give us a fairly large gap here, which might be noticeable. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to position it just like I have with the last hooping, line it up with this, and we'll come back and I'll show you how to handle that 2 inches. There are actually several ways that can be handled depending on the system that you're using, but I have my own way of doing it. But that will happen in a few minutes. So I'm just going to tug on this to get it lined up where I want it. Get out my clamps again, clamp it, clamp it. And you might wonder if I'm clamping this in any particular order. Well, that really depends on how much pull I think I'm going to have. I may clamp it from top to bottom first and then from the sides. I might clamp one on one side, one on the other. It all depends how much the quilt is moving on me when I clamp it down. It's really hit and miss. You just have to experiment and see what works for you. Okay, I'm just double checking everything here to make sure I'm secure and I have everything in the right spot. Now we're going to move the needle back to the center position. Now I'm off a little bit here on the center position according to this. So I'm just going to fine tune this. And that's good, right there, bullseye. Okay, let's take out the grid and start again, just double checking my magnets. and I'm going to readjust my suspension. Oops. One of my spins came down. Okay. I think no, I don't like that. Put that over there a little bit more. No, maybe it goes this way. So I'm getting my suspension right here so that the bulk of the quilt, there is no weight resting on my sewing machine table. And I think that's got it. And let's go. Pull up my thread, start it, and then I'll trim the tail off when it has a clear spot. You want to be careful. You don't want to get your scissors underneath your needle or you're going to have disaster. And you could hurt yourself as well. Okay, I'll come back to show you what I'm going to do with that last 2 inches. Sorry, 2 inches. Okay, so I have finished this hooping and now I'm going to move it right over to the edge. And this is where things get a little bit more tricky. So let's just move the hoop up. And you see I guess you can't see it very well there. Maybe I'll move the camera over a little bit more. That might be better. So you see I have this space right in here that isn't going to be enough to fill in with the whole motif. And then it's going to go off the edge. So I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do about this, but I'm going to try a couple of different things and then make a decision about it. And I'm letting you see my thought process because this is a really real situation. Now you could sit down and do the mathematics and figure out exactly where you should start your design and the size of it and the whole bit. And you know, that's a lot of work, quite frankly. So I got to grab my grid here and place it in the hoop. And you'll notice that my quilt's moving a lot because I've got my clamps on over the other side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line this up as if I was going to do the entire design. And I'm using my tape on my grid to match this up to where it should be. And I'm using my edges as my guides. They are not completely straight, but that's okay because in the overall scheme of things, when this quilt is finished, you're not going to notice. As long as you're close enough, you're not going to notice that I'm off. Now, you'll also notice here that I don't have a lot of clamping area. But again, not going to be really a problem because I have enough. And I've got the weight of this taken off, and you can't see it right now, but I'm adjusting my clamps to make sure that my quilt is not pulling too far, and it still is. So I'm just going to stand up here. Sorry that you can't see what I'm doing, but I'm talking you through it. So I'm just trying to get the quilt, the bulk of the quilt off my table. Still not quite right. You have to play with this system a little bit. Again, yes, I know, if I was using a long arm, I wouldn't have to do all of this, but I'm not using a long arm, am I? Okay, so essentially, I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at my center line down here, and that is where my two upper and the bottom motif will be placed. I'm thinking that what I might need to do is going to run off the edge just slightly. So I'm going to adjust my quilt I'm going to pull it over a little bit. Now, it'll be a little bit further away from where I want to start, but that's okay. It's not enough that it's really going to stand out and make a big difference. Now, if you were doing this with the complete AccuFill system, they have an ability in the program where you mathematically put in some information and it will figure out this little part that's off the edge. The other thing that would have been very helpful for me, if I hadn't forgot to do that, was to make sure I had more fabric over here. Then it wouldn't matter so much. So my machine will stop after it finishes the motif in here. So then what I'll do is I'll just move it into this last quadrant down in here, or the third quadrant, I suppose, if this is 1, 2, 3, 4, if you count it that way. And that should work out all right. Now make sure my clamps are down good for this. Even though there's much fabric under here, I'm going to put that one up there too as extra reinforcement. Same with down here. And okay, so let's move the plate back. It looks like I have to do a bit of and I'm already as far over as I can go. So sometimes that happens, you can't move the needle anymore. But I'm not worried about that because it's close enough, and this is off here. It's never going to be seen. It's going to get cut off and the binding's going to cover it. So it'll look like it's continuous. Okay, let's start her up. Now I want to adjust my clamps again because there's a bit of a strain here. Okay, pull up my thread. Away we go. Now I'm watching this very carefully over here to make sure that I don't run into a problem like getting my presser foot getting underneath my batting here, causing a snag. This is where a stiletto comes in handy. I'm not using a stiletto, I'm using mine because I'm too lazy to get up, so I'm using my tweezers. Okay, so I'm going to let this play out in this quadrant, and then I'll show you when I finish this quadrant what I'm going to do down in this quadrant. Okay, so I finished the first quadrant here, and you can see that the pattern has gone off onto the batting into the backing fabric, and I just made it to the edge, and I had to watch that very carefully that my foot did not get caught underneath it, and it didn't. But now the next thing it wants to sew is this quadrant up here, but I don't want it to sew that. But if you remember when I ran out of bobbin thread and I ran out at the beginning of quadrant 3 down in here, I noted for myself what number of stitch it starts at. So that's where I'm going to move the needle right now. And I have a facility on my sewing machine that allows me to plug in that number. And I'll look at my note, and my note says the number is 9343. So I'm just going to plug in 9343, hit OK, and my needle will go right over to that starting position. And I can start again. Now right now it's starting off the batting, but that's okay. And I'm watching this edge here carefully with my stiletto just to make sure that the foot doesn't get caught under that. There it goes. And now it'll do that third quadrant. Those are the only quadrants I need because I've run out of space over here, so that will be fine. So that means that I've done this half of the first row. So when I come back here in a second, I'm going to show you what happens next to do the other half of this first row. Okay, so it finished on that side, and what I've done now is I've turned the whole quilt around so that my top row is now my bottom row, so I can work in this direction from here over to the far side. Now, in order to do that, I have to line it up again. So I'm going to put in my grid, but this time, this, which was at the top, is now at the bottom, and that's where I'm going to start doing the lining up according to my marks on my grid, my tape marks. And basically it's essentially the same thing. I'm just lining them up with that, but I am paying attention to where this line is coming along here because I want to keep it fairly even. Now, are you going to be perfect? No, you are not going to be perfect. And how do I keep it straight? I'm going to look at my straightest line in my quilt and try to match it up with the closest line on my grid. And that's looking pretty good. I'm just going to pull it over a little bit more this way. And still looking at this. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So now I've got to clamp it down. Now I've got nothing down here to clamp to. Again, that was my mistake. I should have made sure that I had left a good 8 inches beyond the top with both my batting and my backing. But because I have 8 of these clamps, 3 sides are going to be clamped down, so I shouldn't have any problem. Except that I dropped them on the floor. Let's pick this back up. Again, you want to watch because this pulls your quilt over when you put these on. And I'm just checking my adjustments again to make sure things are reasonably straight and lined up. One more clamp on this side. And that's looking pretty good. Now this clamp's feeling a little funny to me. I'm making sure it's connecting. Those 2 clamps I don't need. Now I have taken my quilt and I have rolled it up again on this side to get rid of the bulk from under here, but I need to now support it. So I'm going to move the camera back away so you can see what I'm going to do. So there's my hooks. And I'm going to take this one, which I wasn't using before, but now I have a need for it. And I'm just going to hook it right there. Now I know I'm blocking your view, but got to. And then this one, and this one over here. Just give myself a little slack. That's maybe not enough. Okay. So I think that's good. That takes the weight up off it. And I'm just going to move. Well, you can't see it now, can you? So what I'm going to do is just what I've done before. I'm going to move my needle to the center, get that lined up, and away I go with the next hooping. And I'm going to do the same procedure. I'm going to move across in this direction, and that'll finish off the row. And when I come to the edge, I will do what I did last time with that little partial part, except I'm going to do something a little different that I didn't think of last time, which may save me some grief. I'm basically, when the needle gets to the point where it is off the quilt top completely, I don't really need to keep quilting. I can advance the needle for that ahead until the needle's in back onto the quilt top. And 1, that'll save thread. 2, it'll also save me some headaches in case my presser foot does get caught underneath it, because it did. I didn't show you that, but it did do that, and I got a big bird's nest in my bobbin, but I was able to get everything realigned and set up with no problem with that. But that is one of the occupational hazards of doing this method. You don't have that problem on a long arm. Well, you could. I've done some long arm work where I got my presser foot caught underneath the edge of my quilt, and it did do some weird things. So problems happen with long arm quilting as well. It's not absolutely foolproof, so you need to monitor it closely. So I'm going to finish this row and come back and show you how you set up for the second row. Okay, so I've got my first row of stitching done, and you can see here what it looks like. And it goes from one end to the other end. And we're down about, 8 inches from that. So we've got a lot to go. But it took, I estimated it was going to take about 8 across. And it took, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and a half. 7 and a half across. So my estimation was pretty good. The back, don't know if the camera's picking this up. Guess it is. But you can see it looks just as good on the back as well. So this is coming along very nicely. So now I'm going to start the second row. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place it in the hoop. Again, I'm going to start in the middle like I did the last time. And I'm just going to use the middle block right in here. And I'm going to use that as my top using my marking tape and keep it as straight as I can and go down from there. And then once that one is done, I'll just move over like I did on the last one, flip it around, move around to the next side. Simple as that. And that's the way I'm going to go through the entire hoop from end to end, or the entire quilt, sorry, not the hoop. And that's how you do it. So this is going to take a while. Okay, for you, it'll be seconds. But for me, it's going to be several days of getting this done. So I will come back when I have it completed and show you the end result then. Okay, so I thought I'd let you see, I've gotten about 3/4 of the way through the quilt right now. And this has been a lot of hours. Okay, this is day 2 of quilting this. And this is what my setup looks like with my bungee cords and clamps. And you can see how it's lifting up the quilt from the table of the machine and keeps the weight off it. So that's how this works. Okay, so at this point I thought I'd let you see what it looks like when I'm working on the last row of the quilt. So you can see I'm using my bungee cords. They're all set up here for this, and it's been working beautifully. I haven't had really any problems. My design might not be quite as straight as I would like it to be, but because it is such a busy design to start with, you really can't notice where it might have gone off a little bit, and it's not a major difference. So it's getting close to being done. It's taken me 2 days to this point, about 8 hours per day to get up here to where I am, and so probably in about another hour, hour and a half, I will have it completely finished, and then we'll return and show you the final result. Okay, so I've finished it now, and here's what the final product looks like. You probably can't see the quilting all that close up from the distance right now, but I will move the camera in a little bit closer so that you can. Try to hold it steady. So there you go. You can see all of the quilting there, and I think it turned out pretty good. Some statistics. This took about 2.5 days, so it took about 20 hours. That included setup of the hoops and everything to do it, to finish it. So yes, on a long arm, this would be a lot faster, but I don't have a long arm. And as I said before, I didn't have to book time. I'm trying to hold this a bit steady for you. I didn't have to book time with my long armor to do this. I could do it at the leisure of my own time in my own home. And I'll just show you what the back of the quilt looks like as well. I'm trying to hold this steady. Sorry for the movement. But here's my back of the quilt. And there you can get a little better look at the quilting as it came through. I'm very happy with the way it turned out. Are there some mistakes? Yes, there are. It isn't completely even. Things got a little crooked, but because of the design that's on this quilt, you really don't notice that. And it's not that drastic. Now, what I have to do is I've got to square the quilt up and put the binding on it, but I'm not going to show you that in this video. But I think you can see that, yes, you can use your embroidery machine to quilt. And let me just put the camera down here for a second and turn it over to me. And so some statistics that you might be interested in with this. This took, like I said, about approximately 20 hours to quilt. So I did it over a period of 2.5 days. It took 3,000 meters, almost 3,000 meters of thread. This is what's left of my thread. It was a 3,000 meter spool. And I probably have a couple of hundred meters left. And what else did I write down? It took approximately 18 minutes per hooping, and I had about 56 hoopings, give or take, for this. And yeah, it worked fine. Now, it's a little boring to do it because you're sitting here watching your machine. Although I didn't have to watch the machine all the way through. I could get up and leave and do other things. In fact, while this was quilting this, I was working on another project at the same time. So I'm very pleased with the end result, and I think this is the biggest quilt I've done to date using the embroidery machine. And my next project that I'm going to quilt is a queen size quilt, a little bigger than a queen size actually. That was going to take a lot more time depending on the design that I pick. Now, when I picked this design, and I'm happy with my choice, but this is a design that really did take a lot of time. It's a fairly heavily quilted quilt. But nevertheless, it turned out, I think, great. So there you go. You don't need a long arm if you have an embroidery machine and if you have the right hoops. And I hope that you might try it on your embroidery machine, whatever one that you have, and use my video as your guide for it. As I said, it's not absolutely perfect, as it would be more so in a long arm, but then again, it's better done than left as a UFO, isn't it? So I hope you enjoyed this video series, and stay tuned for future projects that I'll use with the embroidery machine. Bye for now.